Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started here. Welcome everyone to Monday's March 22nd school board study session for Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sala.
Thank you, Chair Ruel, and good evening, board members, administrators, and everyone who is listening. The purpose of our study sessions is to provide updates, to build trust, and to ensure that we have shared understanding so that we can make efficient and effective board decisions at the table that the board can. Tonight, we will continue working through our budget adjustment process, and we also have several of the 500 series policies to review.
Okay, so with that, as Dr. Sala stated, we're just going to be pretty much living in two of our roles, one of them being policy, which we've been hitting pretty hard the last few meetings. So we'll be living under our role under district policy, reviewing policy, and then, of course, the majority of our presentation tonight is going to be on the preliminary budget discussion. So with that, I think we will go to the budget process update.
All right, thank you very much. Again, good evening. And as I said, tonight we'll continue to move through the budget adjustment process. The two outcomes that we have for this evening include bringing the initial recommendations for the $2 million budget adjustment target to the board and to seek direction from the board on these recommendations as we look for final board approval on April 12th. The priority of our budget work is to align the resources to our strategic plan as we seek an excellent education focused on the work associated with our strategic directions so that our mission can be realized for all of our learners. Well, the formal timeline and budget reduction process began in February. As you know, there was certainly much work that Julie Sink and her team did on the current budget as we worked to revise that and in planning for next year's budget long before the first date that you see listed here. But as you see through this timeline that we are nearing the end of the budget adjustment process. As an overview and a reminder, we're engaged in this budget adjustment process to help ensure that we seek financial stability over the next 2 years as we solve for a $4 million budget deficit. The board provided direction for a $2 million budget adjustment as we determine the 2021-2022 budget. And this will bring our fund balance down to approximately 8.5%, which is within the fund balance policy, but on the lower end of that policy, which calls for an 8 to 12% fund balance. As part of the budget adjustment process, we wanted to ensure that we gathered multiple perspectives from staff across the district. We did this through two primary steps. First of all, principals, site leaders, and department leaders at the DSC hosted a staff meeting for their staff members where the budget information from the February 22nd board study session was shared. After those meetings, all staff members were invited to submit budget adjustment ideas, which were collected across the district. Once that initial input was closed, the data and the ideas were disaggregated by each school, as well as by some departments and the District Services Center. Principals and other program and department leaders then met with their building instructional leadership teams, their team leads, or their DSC departments to review district ideas and those ideas that came specifically from their buildings and departments. They discussed ideas and then they collaboratively submitted the ideas each team felt was in that priority area. And those then came to administration as well. In the initial process, inviting all staff members to have an opportunity for input, we received 198 total responses. The slide in front of you, which I know our viewing public can't see, shows the breakdown of what % of the overall responses came from each building or department. And you'll see in some of our buildings, we have a 1 or 2%, and then we have a building where 34% of that 198 total responses came. So you can see different levels of engagement as we invited staff members to come forward and share their ideas.
Hey, Terry, can you hang on 1 second? board members, are you guys looking in your packets? So you can see the information? Do we need it displayed? Because it's not being displayed on the screen. I don't know if anyone else could see it. Can people see it? I can't see it, so.
No, Stacy, I can't see it, but I'm wondering if anybody else is logged in. I don't know if this is open to the public. They should be able to see that.
No, they won't see it because it's only audio.
Martha, are you presenting
okay.
your screen?
She's,
Or-
yeah, I think we've texted her.
Yeah, I'm two screening, so I've got board book up on another machine, so I can scroll along.
Yeah, and I have a paper copy, so I don't know if anyone else.
I did
does
text her.
Okay.
And board book for what isn't downloading on my end, which probably my,
Okay.
so I can't see it either.
Let's, okay.
Stacy, it says to on Martha's screen that she is sharing, but we're not seeing it. So maybe she's checking it.
Okay. Do, Amy, you're the only one that can't see the presentation.
Yeah, you guys can move forward and I'll keep working on my end.
Okay, just chat me and then Martha can figure it out here too. I say keep going because I think
Oh, here it comes.
Okay.
Hey,
It's
there it
happening.
is.
it's happening. Okay, there we go. All right, yep, that's the page we're on.
Okay, perfect. So again, you can see that breakdown of what percentage of the overall responses came from each building or department. And then as we look to the next slide, those 198 ideas centered around broadly the following themes: administration, staffing, and substitute reductions, and we'll talk about these later in the presentation. Curriculum and professional development work, and you'll also see a recommendation about district staff development later in the presentation. Early retirement incentives, that was an idea that came forward by several people, and I want the board to know that we did review this concept, and it wasn't feasible for us to consider that at this time in this year. There were some ideas around the fund balance and the board spending down more of the fund balance, which is exactly the direction that the board provided us at the last meeting. As you recall, originally you had provided direction for a $2.5 million budget adjustment. And as we learned more about the state budget and possibilities of federal dollars, you agreed to spend down more of the fund balance while also maintaining the policy parameters when you directed a $2 million budget adjustment. Ideas around printing, software, waste reduction, transportation were shared. And we did spend quite a bit of time reviewing printers, printing costs, toning costs, reviewing printing that happens in each of our departments in our buildings. And we determined at this point that while you won't see any of these ideas reflected in the recommendations, we do want to continue to work on cost savings, being as paper light as we can be in the district, reducing the number of paper copies that we produce, all of which not just help us save cost, but they also really align with us being an E-STEM district. There were some ideas around program reductions and enhancements, and you won't see those ideas coming forward. There were also ideas and some staff who supported going out, having the board consider going out to our community with a technology levy request to help ensure stable funding for our technology. And that's something that the board has been talking about, and we can continue to discuss that as a strategy moving forward. And then there were also several ideas that came forward about implementing a 4-day in-person week with 1 day in distance learning. And board members, I want you to know that this was not something that I entertained. I do not believe this is something that's best for students, nor will it significantly be a cost saver for us right now. Additionally, administrators did not support it, and I was fairly confident that it would not be the direction of the board, nor of our families to move forward in this direction. So then the next slide starts talking about those budget adjustment recommendations after we reviewed the input and worked through the process, costing, analysis, and impact of decisions. I'm recommending the following budget adjustments. You've heard us talk about the ESSER II funds. This is one-time funding. of $772,000. Again, that money we do not have at this point. Our legislators are still in conversations with MDE about that, so we're hoping to see that soon. We also realized a cost savings with the annual right sizing of staff to enrollment. A 10.2 FTE is what we're looking at right now for that right sizing process. Jim will speak to that a little bit later. In terms of the administrative reduction, I am recommending the elimination of one position, the assistant superintendent, and also a one-year hold on hiring the activities director. What the plan will be is Prior Lake High School, one of our assistant principals will assume that role of the activities director for a year, and Prior Lake High School will operate with one less AP for the year. I've got some information there about achievement and integration. As you recall, we did levy for an additional $400,000 for achievement and integration revenue. Our plan is to use these new dollars to support translation improvements, and which will also improve the access of information for our students and our families. Additionally, we will use some of these funds to advance our equity and inclusion work through a new equity leadership position. We're in the process right now of studying other districts, reviewing job descriptions, roles and responsibilities to determine what position will be best for moving our work forward. Additionally, we'll use a portion of the new revenue to help offset part of the salaries of our elementary deans. The work of our deans helps us reach our attendance goals, student development goals, gap closing goals, and academic goals as part of the achievement and integration plan. Moving forward on the next slide, because we did not spend as much money as anticipated for staff development this year, we are recommending that we use one-time funds in district staff development to support portions of salary and benefits of staff who provide supports to our district. Also, the next line item around technology. A few years ago, we had a team who completed a PDSA, a Plan, Do, Study, Act process regarding the district use of both the Google Suite and Office 365. Well, there was administrative support at that time to maintain Google as the primary tool and email for the district. We did not make the change at that time. So now this idea surfaced again through this process. And in addition to the dollars that it would save, we also believe it would be more efficient and enhance productivity if all students and staff use the Google Workspace for Education Plus. And then some staff and departments also maintained Office 365 for some of the work that they have to do. And then the last recommendation is to have Prior Lake High School pilot support and supervision differently for substitute teachers. This wouldn't be all substitutes, but we have targeted a $15,000 amount that Dr. Bizik and his staff would work through to realize not just a cost savings of not hiring as many substitute teachers, but it's also a direction that we've talked about moving toward previously. The high school administration and staff believes that they can make some changes that will not only save money, but also provide some flexibility for students. So you can see the total recommended amount that's coming forward this evening is $2.120 and $111. The next steps concludes the presentation. Actually, there's one more slide that Jim Quorum will speak to, but the next steps will be after this evening's discussion for the board to provide direction, and then a budget adjustment proposal will come forward to the board for action on April 12th at the regular board meeting. After that, then we'll communicate to staff what the board action was about the proposal that came forward. So before we do open it up for questions and discussion, I've asked Executive Director of Human Resources, Jim Quorum, to speak to the right sizing of staff to enrollment recommendation. And then certainly if there's questions about other things, we've got different administrators who can help support and answer those questions. So Jim, if you want to take that last slide and talk through that a little bit.
Sure. Sure. Good evening. Yeah, I just wanted to talk to the process around staffing. It's always, obviously one of the most sensitive issues that we have to deal with. And I felt it was worth coming forward and just talking about how this affects things going for next year as far as class size. As we heard from you, the direction was to right size without increasing that average class size to keep it consistent. We weren't going to go into a budget cut mode there and increase class size in order to gain reductions in an effort to keep it as much away from the classroom as we could. And so what we did is we used the targets and we did the math and basically came up with that 10.2 reduction. The majority would be in the elementary, with some in the secondary as well. That's, as we've talked about for literally months or a year or so. The kids in the elementary is where the numbers haven't supported what we've done the last few years. So in this right sizing, we would end up with a class size average that is boringly flat over the last 7 or 8 years. We have this dip this year and then up slightly for next year. Again, this is doing the math as far as the students that we currently have, with the intent that as we add students and are able to add staff, we would add staff. So again, this is the right sizing portion. And it comes out to like 22.77 is the overall classroom average size. That's an example in the elementary. And so I just wanted to point that out again, because this is, to me, this is a critical message that we are not increasing class size in order to gain additional reductions. Just a couple other things that I'll just point out real quick that might be questions. We're going through this process. I really am hesitant to share much more about where they are, because we're having meetings with the principals on a lot of variables that relate to this, resignations, retirements, all of those things that come into play here as we look for those 10.2. So if we can do this with a minimal number of staff who want to be there, that would be great. But we're working through that process right now and lining that up as best we can. So the other thing that I would say related to this is that when this comes to the board, this is, I think, worth mentioning right now. You normally are not going to see just 10 or 11 names that come to the board in April, because we have other reasons that people get non-renewed, that like licensure, that as a tier 1 teacher, we need to non-renew them as well. So I just want to throw that out there, because oftentimes it's surprising when you may see more than that, 14, 15, whatever it is. There are additional non-renews that come forward. That is of no one's fault. It's part of the process that we have to do based upon usually licensure. So.
Okay. Is that, Terry, ready for
Yep.
questions? Ready for questions?
Yep, we are.
Okay,
Thanks.
so like I said, just to kind of keep things, I think Martha's going to stop presenting unless she needs to, but so I can see people. But if you can go ahead and just raise your hand. I think, Jonathan, you have your hand raised. Did you have some questions?
I raised it a long time ago, and I'm not sure what for. I think it was when we were trying to sort out the presentation thing. But I'm happy to go first. I have a couple of notes written down. Every time we talk about, I don't know who this is for, Julie, perhaps, every time we talk about the ESSER funds as a component in here, we always reference the fact that we are waiting for action from the state. Do we have a what if plan? Do we have a contingency if somehow they just, it concerns me that we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and counting on something to come from someone we have no influence or little influence over. So that is just a mild concern. We keep talking about when without knowing. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I did sit in with a meeting with the interim commissioner, and they did indicate to us as MASBO that they would be distributing those funds on July 1. So that's what we're hearing at this point. Unless the Senate were to approve of those funds earlier, they're not hopeful for that. And so it'd be July 1.
But you actually have gotten a date out of someone. So I would call that progress. Overall, I guess my thoughts on this whole process, there's part of me that does have a concern that we aren't taking a bigger bite out of this in year one. I'm not thrilled about going down to 8.5, and I voiced that before with the fund balance. But again, you have reserves to get you through tough times, and so by definition, that is what we're dealing with. So overall, I can support this. We gave, I think, pretty clear direction about administrative cuts being, leading there sort of to some extent. And that was it, when that was a conversation about money. That was an easier conversation for me. When it's a conversation about somebody whose face is in this meeting, that's hard. Those are hard decisions and hard choices. But that is how this works. And so I appreciate that. I don't know that anybody can look at this plan and say that you didn't take that instruction from us. So that certainly happened. And I do feel as though the bulk of what will happen here is not going to have an immediate impact in our classrooms. And Jim, you've clarified that with the numbers. To me, that's absolutely critical. And my last question is for Jim. You have talked about this in the past when we've gone through the numbers about whether we are right sizing to butts and seats, is your phrase, to our current enrollment or to our anticipated enrollment in the fall, because we have budgeted with an assumption of an increase. Can you speak to where we are in that process?
Yep, that is exactly what we did. We are staffing based upon the students we actually have. And we will hire as more students come up and in. So, one of the processes we'll need to look at is the open enrollment numbers to see how many. There's a fair amount of space, even with the reductions that we've made in many classes in many levels and many buildings to offer. But yep, that's exactly right. We are staffing based upon students we know that we have, including kindergartners that have enrolled.
Okay, I appreciate that. Those are my questions. I'll hit my mute button.
Oh, can you put your hand down now? Thank you. Okay, anyone else as far as questions? Mary.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. How are we doing with insurance costs, Julie? I know that we started off at a very high amount we thought we were going to go, and then it dropped by a few percentage points. Where are we with that?
We actually just had a meeting tonight talking about that. The recommendation that was agreed upon by the insurance committee is a 6.11% increase, down slightly from our 6.6 that we had projected. So there's some savings in there as well.
Yeah, we were at one time, I thought, at 12% with the original estimate, so we've cut that in half. Is that reflected in any of these numbers?
The difference is about, I'm going to say, $150,000.
Okay, so we're anticipating an extra $150,000 savings on top of this.
Or not expending, yes.
Okay. Well, it's better than the original number, let me.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, you know, so Terry, some of the, first of all, the percentage responses were low from the teachers. I think that's a reflection that is not good. And I'd like to spend some time at some point in time. We can't do anything about it tonight, but I definitely want to look at why the level of involvement was so low. And I know that last year's process was painful. But I also want to ask about, one of the questions was the printing. We spend a lot of money on printing. I mean, I think the initial, even just the base without Dakota printing, whatever the printer gate stuff is, and the Konica Minolta, the Konica Minolta one alone, just for the lease printers and the amount of paper and ink, goes well above 100,000 a year. Isn't that something that we could cut quite a bit, given the fact that a lot of our stuff is now online? Or you know, what is the perception of that? And I'm just talking about one value that I saw in the numbers that passed through. So any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, we had a lot of thoughts on it, and Marcus Milazzo and Julie's team did a lot of work looking at what some costs were. In terms of printing, most of the costs for printing go back into the building and department budgets. And so at this point, again, what I said earlier during the presentation is, rather than have a reduction in terms of what the printing costs are, we want to go after it, you know, in conversations with leaders about, you know, being more strategic about what has to be printed and doesn't have to be printed. And again, we're in a different place with some of our devices and tools for students, so that might look different or be a strategy that's different moving forward. In terms of curricular things, you know, if we didn't print anything, then we might have more cost in terms of consumables and some of those kinds of things. So it's definitely something, like I said, while it isn't a recommendation, it certainly is something that we want to continue to push our leaders to look at in their own buildings and departments, and to see what strategies we can do to reduce that. Because if we spend fewer dollars in supply budgets on printing, there's more dollars to spend on something else.
Okay. I would assume that since we have so much of our stuff online, and then that was my next question is, you know, we invested a lot of the CARES dollars and stuff like that, as well as into online software. Are we going to continue to renew that? And is that a cost that was estimated going forward? Or how are we managing, like, the stuff that we bought for COVID and the pandemic and stuff like that, regardless of whether they came from the CARES funds or whatever? Is that something we're going to continue to invest in, like the additional licenses for IXL and all that kind of stuff? I'm not sure how that plays into our long-term plan here, if that helps or hurts us, or what the story is.
Well, I'll start with that, and I might hand it over to Jeff to help out. But I know one of the things that we did look at, we did again ask Marcus those questions about license and how do we annually determine what we continue to subscribe to and what we don't. So annually, his department and teaching and learning go through a process where they look at the use and then determine, are there some licenses and softwares that just aren't being used? So that's annually we look at, and we say, are there things that go off the list? Are there other things that go on the list? In terms of IXL, I believe, Jeff, that is continuing because of the use and the input of teachers and the use of that. That will be something that we continue with moving forward as part of our overall personalized learning goals.
Correct. We started looking at IXL several years ago, and part of, obviously COVID really kind of brought that to the forefront, but we were looking at more of a long-term strategy at looking at bringing IXL into our district as a backbone to our personalized learning efforts. So when we started, we do have a multi-year contract. When you work with companies, typically we you phase it in, as you know, you phase those things in as you start to bring them in. For example, we got the first, I think, 6 or 8 months free as part of this rollout, but it factors into our overall budget moving forward to provide IXL for our students and our staff.
You know, my question wasn't just about IXL, it was about the concept. Because, you know, we have distance learning, so we didn't buy a lot of the textbooks and the workbooks and stuff like that. But I don't want to see us literally caught with a renewal cost, because, you know, we got some of that, you know, with funds coming in from the state. What happens when all that stuff renews? Do we have a life cycle plan? Do we know that we're not going to be stepping on a rake here?
Yeah, we do have ongoing discussions and planning conversations around all of those software costs. I will tell you, though, that it continues to be a challenge to plan for the ongoing curriculum and software needs for the district. Because the costs of those things continue to go up. Those subscription costs, as you heard earlier this evening, you know, some of those curriculum offerings from the standpoint of online platforms are not very versatile. But also too, as we and they don't always match up with the standards update that come from the Department of Education. But it is an ongoing challenge every year as we look at how all the different current software subscriptions that we have and how we plan forward over the next couple of years relative to when standards are up for review and when we bring teams back together again to look at standards.
And then I had 2 more things, and the other one was, I'm a little confused what you mean by the Office 365 versus Google. I know that Google's always been available to the kids and to the staff. How are we just limiting the number of licenses that we're now getting from Microsoft on their educational program? I mean, how did that work? Because one of the issues that a lot of the students have and all that is that they don't have experience in Microsoft products, and they need that going into secondary education or getting into jobs and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, is this a change or is this just staff? Just please explain it. I was kind of confused.
Yeah, it'll be a change because right now they have access to both, and our students primarily use the Google Suite. Again, what we would have to do if this is a recommendation that's supported by the board is then we'll have to go through a process to determine what classes, what staff, what departments need to maintain access.
It was only a $20,000 cut. That's why I was kind of, what exactly did we cut? Was it $20,000 to get the entire district on, or what? I'm not sure what we had to begin with. I know what Microsoft says we have, but I'm not sure how it's deployed or what the intricacies are.
Well, I know one of the other issues, and again, Jeff, step in if as I'm talking, but one of the other things is that the Google Workplace also has an increase. Some of the, again, as we started the pandemic, and some of the features that were free all of a sudden are not going to be free anymore. So there's going to be an increased cost to what Google is, which means that the savings isn't as much as what we looked at a couple of years ago when we went through this process. Jeff, is there anything else?
No, that's correct.
Okay, well, it just seems like a really small cut for what looks like a big impact. So,
and again, I'm sorry. The only thing I would say is, again, this got brought back up as an idea to see as we looked at cost savings. But the other part of that, and the research that was done by a team of administrators a couple of years ago, was also looking at just the redundancy, the efficiency, the productivity, not supporting 2 different platforms. And so it's not just those $200 or that $20,000. It's also the administrators, our recommendation that there is also an increase in productivity and efficiency by doing this.
Okay. As far as the cuts go, last year was hard on everybody. And Jim, I brought this up in the finance meeting. I totally understand how the confusion can happen when the contract, renewals and the changes come up, because it looks like a very large large list. Every year it does, and it's really confusing. But you know, these are people who have taught in our district, have relationships with the kids. And, you know, if I have a gas station or whatever, and I've got 5 people and I'm cutting it down to 3 or 4, I'm still cutting people, even if they're hourly and this is right to work and all that. So I want to be very sensitive to how we phrase this. These are still human beings. We are still asking a lot out of our teachers. And in that, I would just like to ask, are we in that 10.2, are we cutting any interventionists?
Right now, those are classroom FTEs. It isn't, so there's a difference between the position and the person, right? And so the positions right now are based upon average class size. The rest of those, whether it's EL, intervention, special ed, all of those things are usually driven by services that they offer and the number of kids that need those services or the number of minutes. So it's a little bit trickier to look at. But we have been having discussions, Jeff, Melissa Knettel, some about looking at each one of those programs, just like we asked special education to look at their right sizing process. And to this point, there is nothing significant there. If we keep the level of service the same, very much like we're doing with the classroom FTEs. And I completely understand these are definitely people and it's a sensitive issue. I think the best thing we can do is be very upfront about it and to be as transparent as we can be as we go through the process and collectively talk about it. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that to this point. But yeah, it's a tough one and it's very public, right? We don't advertise when we add, but you have to go through a very regimented process when you reduce, and it becomes a very public thing. So I totally get that, the sensitivity around it.
Okay. You good, Mary?
You want more?
No, I just
Okay.
I didn't know if you're set or not. Okay. Amy, Michael, Enrique. Anybody? Questions? Concerns? Michael.
Not so much questions maybe, but just some observations. And that is, first of all, I just want to, as a board, echo what both Mary and Jonathan said, that this is really hard. And we put the burden forward primarily on Dr. Stallo and then her administrative team to do this hard work. This cannot have been an easy time period. Budget reductions never are. And as a board, carrying over from last year, we were really clear to lead with administrative, and we were pretty protective of class size and teachers. What I just want to make clear, at least in my understanding, is that even if we are eliminating positions or temporarily filling them in another way so we can maintain them long-term, but not hire this year, what we are doing is still increasing the workload for other people in our district. So it's not as simple as just taking that off of the flow chart. It means that extra work will go to our superintendent, extra work will go to teaching and learning, will go to HR, will go to our building admins, our principals. And I also want to be sensitive to that. We're asking more of other people, in this transition. But in doing so, I think it kept extra work and cuts from teachers and class size, and it kept us from reducing programs this time around in the budget. So I think this is a good combination of short-term and long-term strategy, doing the best we can to navigate this year and knowing we'll probably have to be looking at this again next year. And I also know, Mary, what you suggested, and I think, Jonathan, you brought it up too, that when those non-renewal lists come through, it's very concerning. I think we want to keep repeating that. Loyola Del Lago, for example, has certain processes they have to go through with their staff. So in protecting these teachers who are impacted, I think that when that list comes out, we just have to continue to state that some of these are just licensure issues, and that we minimized as much as we could for the right sizing part, not due to budget cuts. So just want to thank everyone for spending so much time on this and struggling with how to navigate it and bringing forth the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, Mary, see the hand, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to, I'm not sure if this is the time to discuss it, but it did come up. Are we in agreement we're going to go out for a tech levy, or is, because obviously we've been through this year after year.
I would say that's going to be coming out of the finance and facilities and FLRP group. You guys are going to be looking at our budget in more detail. I think it's definitely something that's going to be a strategy that we're going to need to look at. I mean, we've looked at before, but take a serious look at it. In my opinion, I mean, I know what Michael's saying as far as, you know, we've had to cut this year and we cut the previous year. I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't want to be doing this again. This is painful for people. And it's people's livelihoods. It's people who've done incredible amounts of work for our district. And so, you know, if that is something, I mean, I will definitely, I don't want to come out and say I'll definitely be supporting a tech levy, but I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to do whatever I can not to do this again next year, because this is the second year in a row. And, you know, we should be looking at everything at this point, because as far as what we're getting for increases, you know, from the state, or, you know, these shell games that people play, you know, we need to get some increased funding. So that's my 2 cents, but I don't know if you want to have that discussion, but I think, honestly, I think that will come out of FLRP.
Okay.
When you're looking at the budget. Terry, Julie, you feel free to jump in there, but I mean, that's where that's going to bubble up.
And tonight, you know, our purpose tonight was to bring forward a recommendation, initial recommendations about the $2 million budget adjustment that we were asked to make. And I think, yeah, for us, we needed to get through this process, and we certainly anticipate that will be continued conversations as we, once these decisions are made, and then move forward.
Thank
Jonathan?
you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
I was just going to say, I thank you for that. I think that needs to be considered. And I'd also, at some point in time, like to use the FLRP or any other committee, or maybe a study session, to do kind of a post-mortem on, you know, the trajectory of how we got into last year and this year, to make sure we're making the necessary adjustments overall, so that we, you know, in addition to the tech levy, that we have a little bit more cushion going forward, if that's possible. But I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. Jonathan, you have your hand up.
I was just going to say, as far as I'm concerned, the tech levy is a win, not an if. I think it's just a matter of working through the process and the timing and figuring out when that gets asked for. I also think that getting through this budget process over this year and next, we probably need to solve these things without making an assumption that something like that gets done. And if and when we get it done, hallelujah, we'll be able to make adjustments. But to me, it's not a given that we're going to go ask and the community is going to say yes.
Right. Okay. Last time around, anybody? Questions, comments? Okay. So with that, that proposal will come forward on the next meeting in April for approval. Where are we at? Sorry. Are we at? I'm just seeing 1, 2, and 3, enrollment update, budget assumption, staffing update. Is that all done with this group? Okay, I just make sure. So, and then on to board governance.
Stacy?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm curious. There's one thing that Mary brought up that I don't want to belabor this, but Mary did bring up the modest savings from the Microsoft Office suite. And I do concur that as our students go out into the workforce, that is something they are going to be using. So I would not be bothered if when you came back to us, and everybody else should speak to this too, but I wouldn't be bothered if that $20,000 of savings, I still want us to get every nickel of savings we can find. But if that is going to impact some of our students being properly prepared to get out there in the world, it does, as Mary said, it does seem like a modest amount of savings if it's affecting a lot of our students. And 2.12 or whatever the number is more than the 2.0 that we asked for.
Is Terry, can you get more clarification on that? I mean, do we need more clarification on that? Is this something that board members, are we okay with that? Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I guess my initial concern wasn't just, what we're doing to potentially students, but that's a really low number if we're taking it away from, how many thousands of students. And that's why I wanted to know what are we actually reducing? And did the students have it to begin with? I was under the impression they did from the copy that I've got and from the students that I work with, but I don't understand how the 20,000 came about. I mean, the cost of Microsoft is a lot more than that for the number of students. So again, it would be great if before the next meeting, we could get a lot of clarification on exactly what was cut and how it's affecting the students. And I agree with Jonathan. To me, if it's such a small amount and it has such a huge impact. But quite frankly, Terry, if I heard you correctly, I kind of heard that they had two suites, let's say, Microsoft team meetings and Google and all that kind of stuff, and we'd be better off going to one. What I didn't hear in that is that it was actually Microsoft Office. I think that's what really still confuses me.
Jeff, Terry, I don't know if we need to go to Marcus and with this question.
I can speak a little bit to it, but I can certainly follow up with Marcus and come back with some additional information. One of the differences that is inherent with Google Workspace is all of the features, you pointed it out early, Mary, is that Google is largely free for educators. But since the pandemic, they have increased, or I guess rounded out their product. And so part of that, with the feature sets that we've become accustomed to and using and our students are using, eventually Google has shared with us that they're going to start charging us. And so the cost for those materials, the cost of using those suite of services like Google Meet, having a certain number of people participate in that, Google Classroom, some of those components, they have informed us that they are going to start charging us. So that difference in cost value is not as great as what it was a couple of years ago, because we were looking at a free Google version, which would have created more of a savings. On the Microsoft side, we're currently in an open value subscription set for Microsoft. It's about $47,000 a year. It brings about a lower cost, but it also is a license for all software. Now, not all of our students and staff use software. They're not using we're not using Teams. We're not using some of the other Microsoft products or feature sets associated with that, because we've been using it more with Google. To Jonathan's earlier point here too, is part of the process of identifying who, as we go through this, Marcus and his team are looking at targeting that $20,000 a year savings, and identifying what are those features, which staff, which classes, which students would need to use the Microsoft products associated with the types of classes that they're in. Case in point, MinCaps. On a business side of thing with the business pathway, certainly we would want students at MinCaps and staff at MinCaps to have the Microsoft suite of software, so that they can engage with business partners. Same thing with our business classes. So, those are just some of the examples and some of the things that we're fine tuning to identify, and hit that $20,000 cut. The goal here is not to just all of a sudden take a whole bunch of things away, leave students high and dry, leave staff high and dry, and take a valuable feature away from them that is going to hinder their ability to do their job or to successfully complete the outcomes of the course. So I'd be happy to get more information on this for the next meeting if that's the direction.
I would very much like if Marcus could kind of detail out what they have now and what the $20,000 cut is going to be taking away, so we can make a more informed decision.
Okay, does that sound good with everybody? I mean, I do see the point. I mean, obviously being in the business world, it's Office 365, 24/7. So I do understand that. So if we're not taking away access from business students or where we see it's applicable, then I can support it too. But yeah, I think some more clarification is definitely warranted. Okay. Jonathan, you still got your hand up. I don't know if it's a trailing hand or what. Anyway, we good? So we're going to move on. Okay. On to policy review. Jeff, I think this is you, right?
Yes, I think the first policy is 511 fundraising, and I will defer that back to Dr. Stalo.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as we looked at policy 511, there really were no substantial changes to that at all. We compared that with the Minnesota School Board Association one, added in a couple places some designee, but there really wasn't a change. There is one strikeout that I had that, I put as a strikeout for conversation with the board. At the bottom of the policy, it says that the superintendent shall report to the school board at least annually on the nature and scope of student fundraising activities approved by this policy. That is not a practice that I have done. And I'm not sure if it was done before me. So I struck it out as a conversation piece with either, if it's in there as policy, then I need to make sure that I do it. And if it's important to the board, we certainly can do that. And if not, I'll leave it as the strikeout. We do get reports on this. There are 3 areas that are really automatic approvals: the PTCs, Wolf Ridge, and the Prior Lake High School Student Council. I do designate that to the building leaders as automatic approvals, and those really are the areas that we have the most fundraising in. So with that, I'll leave it to discussion or any questions.
Okay. And just to clarify, the MSBA does not have that last line in there. The one that you're struck out, that's not in their policy. I just want to clarify that.
Actually, I think it might be.
Oh, in MSBA's?
I've got it in front of me. Yep, they have an annual report. The superintendent shall report to the board at least annually on the nature of the fundraisers.
Okay. I'm looking back in my memory of why this is and how this has happened. I'm just trying to, but anyway, Mary, you had a question. Go ahead. I'll think.
Well, first of all, my first question was, did the MSBA update this policy? Because Julie, you had, obviously there's been some changes in how we have to, monitor the finances and a few other things that have come up, and we have Fund 50 that shows up in our financial reports. So my first question is, was the MSBA policy created prior to some of the changes?
They've not updated since 2000, and they have not revised since 2003. The original policy is 1995, and it was revised in 2003.
So it probably doesn't reflect it. And Julie, you seem to be incredibly knowledgeable about the change and, how we're supposed to monitor the funds and all that kind of stuff. Is if you're fine with this and there's no other changes, then I would be good with that. And also just remind anybody who's listening that we do show the balance. And I believe that's reflected in that Fund 50 where you have the booster fund or whatever. That's kind of reflected here too. That's part of this, right?
It's part of it, but the majority of our student activity is in Fund 1 as a restricted fund portion in Fund 1. And Fund 50 is really for those the money is coming in and going out to another nonprofit organization like Pennies for Patients or something like that. So the policy doesn't affect how we account for the money, really.
How is it reflected in the finances? Is it like is it like a code number or something like that it's restricted?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Mary, you still got your hand up, just FYI. Anyone else? No other questions? I guess, as far as the reporting, I guess I'd ask a question. What would the reporting look like? I'm trying to remember. Julie, have we done this before? With Sue Ann. I'm trying to think. I feel like we've done this, and I can't remember how and what it looked like. Yeah, have we reported on it? No, we haven't, really?
As fundraisers, usually goes to the office of the superintendent, and then it gets reported from there.
I'm thinking of major magnitude.
Yeah.
You know, how we changed that.
We,
That's what I was thinking. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff's gonna.
I was major magnitudes typically came to the board, and there was conversation about it. I want to say there also was something in the consent agenda that was created by the superintendent's office that just gave an overview of the fundraising that happened during the year that was maybe done in the spring or the summer that the board looked at. It wasn't. It was just
a consent thing.
Yeah.
It was a consent agenda item with a listing of all the fundraisers that occurred.
So how did we do like No Shave November?
Wait.
Sorry.
One more question. Hang on. So Julie, now that we're reporting those numbers, I mean, we're showing our financials fully, right? I mean,
we always have.
Right,
it's not,
right. But I mean, like, it's public
in the general fund now.
Right. So I mean, it's there, but I don't know if it's an official report. Okay. Terry, go first, then Mary. Hang on.
No, I mean, we track it all. I mean, again, this is, if the board wants me to report or wants us to put something in a consent agenda annually, it's not a problem. It just hasn't been the practice. So like I said, I took it off there as a discussion point, and we can certainly move either way with it.
Mary, go
I
ahead.
have no problem with that. I don't think you need to add that to your plate. We've never had it. I've been more than satisfied with any questions that I've ever had. But I did want to put this in a context, because I know that you mentioned that one fundraiser that you've mentioned repeatedly as an example, but I know that didn't we do a No Shave November again this year or something like that, or last year? And was that considered a fundraiser?
If it was run through I don't know if that was run through the student council. I don't know how formalized that was. Again, the Prior Lake High School Student Council, PTCs, and Wolf Ridge, I do automatic approvals on, because those come annually to us. So Mary, I'm not sure about the specifics of that, but I'm guessing it was probably if they did it through the student council.
Julie, yeah, you want to talk about the procedure?
So only the PTC, the district does not have anything to do with any fundraiser money. Usually those run through their coffers, not the district's. And so we do not track that because they're collecting the fees and they're taking care of those.
You're talking like the readathons, elementary readathon, like that kind of stuff, right?
If the PTCs are putting them on, then now they are all 501c3s, and they have their own.
Yeah.
And the district does not. What happens is, and similar to the boosters, that money comes back to the district as a donation in some other way.
Okay.
And so we don't collect that and we don't track that. What we do is anything to do with the school. So student council, any activity things or other fundraisers that the district does. But
Anything that they raise money for, that the actual student council or groups within the school, basically.
Right.
Because the other ones contain parents, outside groups.
Correct.
How's everyone feeling about are we good with the way it's being done now, as far as we don't need to add a report or something else to do? Okay. All right. So everyone's okay with it as it's listed. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next one.
All right. The next three policies all have been reviewed by our health services coordinator and Kate Kyle and Deb Anderson. So the first one on 516 is on medication. And so you see some minor revisions there, most notably the parent or legal guardian. There was a board question, a question that came from the board, and this is a great place to insert it here, is some of our policies say guardian, some say legal guardian, which is right, which is different. Just running it by our legal, either is fine. It's a matter of semantics. Some of our statutes say guardian, legal guardian. Either is fine for the district to use, and we can use them both interchangeably. So you see that noted through most of the policy. And then more recently, I think on the third page, you see that note about sunscreen with, obviously students using that as well. With that, if there's any questions on this one, otherwise I can go to DNI 518.
I think, Mary, do you have a question?
Yeah. We've got aspirin, you've got, antibiotics, stuff like that. Why did we call out sunscreen?
We've had, yeah, that's a great question. Over the past couple of years, we've just had, families and students using it more, just being outside, being more aware of, those types of things. And so that, it's something that, again, when you have students that are using it, it's just it eliminates the question. And so it allows families and students to use it as they see fit. And so that's why you see that in there.
Okay, just never thought about that as a medication, but all right.
Yeah, true.
Okay, I think we can head to the next
Okay. The DNI, I think it's just a capital O throughout the document. O on orders.
Okay.
Not a very big change there.
All right.
And then on
I
530.
think the one. Yep.
But are there questions on the DNI?
Yep. I don't see any. Go ahead.
Okay. On the immunization requirements, you see some revisions to the requirements there in the front, but not anything, not a very large revision.
Any questions on that one? Okay. All right, seeing none there. We don't have any first readings of policies. So then on to the second reading of policies. Jeff, I think this is you again, right?
Yes, these have been back several times, 505, 509. I do want to come back to 524 because at the last board meeting there was a question brought up about privacy, and I want to circle back on that. And then 525, 525.1 have remained the consistent through the process. But looking at 524 on the fourth page, based on at the last board meeting, I think we had it was something about, from the privacy standpoint, if students and families are using district-owned devices, they should have no reasonable expectation of privacy of content in the data. I think before it said that they would have limited or should expect only limited. So working with our legal counsel, we have redrafted that privacy statement on 524, fourth page, I think toward the bottom.
520. I'm just trying to find it through.
Second to the last page, or third to last.
Oh.
Geez, this is long. Fourth to last page.
Have no reasonable expectation.
Correct.
Okay.
Great.
Is everybody good with that?
Yeah. Can I? I'm sure your counsel explained that to you.
Yes.
So basically, that doesn't mean that you can just stalk somebody or you're still subject to discrimination. So you can't just monitor a student because you don't like them, or a staff member or whatever. You have to have reason to go in there. But once you do, basically from if the, you know, I wasn't in the room with you when you were talking about it, but basically there's no, you know, there's no guardrails to even jump over. I mean, it's your device, it's on your network, et cetera. If you have reasonable, you know, cause to go in there and look at whatever's going on, then it's yours. You don't have to go through a checklist of making sure you filter or have a definition of reasonable.
Okay.
True.
All right. Everybody's good with that one? Is there any other questions on any of those other policies that we're having a second read on?
I do have one thing, Stacy, if I can speak.
Yep.
You know, well, okay, we haven't gotten to it yet. You're not
Which
going
one?
to talk about 5525.1, or are we going to go on?
No, you can. I think at this point there wasn't anything, so I think go ahead. 525.1 is what you're referring to.
Yeah. And I know this has been brought up multiple years, many years before I got on the board, repeatedly. We are one of the few districts that has, you know, no standard policy across the district for use of personal cellular devices. You know, we talk about respect, we talk about all this stuff, but a lot of them basically say, you're not going to use them during classroom. This is what you're going to agree to. We can confiscate it, you know, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, you have a limited use. It has to be turned off, kept in your locker or on your body, but turned off, etc. And I believe that even the teachers had a survey out, and I think over 80% of them asked for cell phones not to be universally placed in the off position during the school day. And I know that wasn't, you know, favorable that at that time by the administration, but we are one of the few districts that still allow cell phones and leave it up to individual teachers and classrooms, and methods by individual teachers and classrooms and all that kind of stuff. And is that something that maybe we could bring up and talk? I'm not saying to change everything now, but is that a topic we could bring up at our data retreat?
Go ahead, Terry. You're on mute. Yep.
Sorry, my response to that initially, and I don't know what other districts do about that. I know that given the extensive training that we've been doing in the last couple of years with I Love You Guys Foundation and school safety, I'm not sure that would be something that I would support. But again, if the board wants us to look at that and review that, then that's certainly the direction that I would take.
I froze. Terry, hold on, hang on, hold on. Anybody there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Well, there's people dropping out. There's people raising hands.
Yeah.
And everything was frozen for a little bit. So sorry.
I heard it.
I don't know if that was me or everybody.
It was everybody.
Okay, because I saw Mary Lee left. Mary came back. Okay. So Terry, I heard you talking. You're still frozen on my screen.
I am.
Well, now you're.
Your voice is back. There you are.
Am I back? Okay.
All right.
Okay, so Terry, you talked about the Love You Guys, right? Saying that you, with all the training that the districts had over the last couple of years, yeah. From
a safety perspective, it would be, and again, you know, if it's being asked because there's abuse of it or kids are doing something wrong, I believe there's different ways to deal with that than through a policy. And I believe our administrators do look at that, and I believe our teachers work with that. But again, if it's the direction of the board, it's certainly something we could do. But
okay, hold on a second. Okay, I'm going to get to Enrique. He's got his hand up.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I agree with that stance as well, Dr. Stallo. Just kind of evaluating the entire landscape, which would also include special education. There are a number of students that utilize personal iPads as augmentative communications devices as part of just their outward communication and engagement in the class. So it's integrated into the classroom with them as part of the learning tool. And to your point, there needs to be some additional scrutiny around what exactly is allowed on those devices before coming up with a policy that just prohibits something that's as far reaching that could have some unintended consequences.
Okay, anybody else? I would just say it from what my experience, I know teachers handle this individually at times. I know, you know, I think us having the flexibility of doing it has worked in our favor. I know it can be challenging at times, but I think as society has changed and continues to evolve, and we have things like the pandemic, and we have things like parents. I mean, I don't know from a parent perspective, if I need to get a hold of my kid, and I think there'd be concerns there. So I would be hesitant to change what we're doing now. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I mean, if the majority of the board wants to look at this, we can. So anybody else? Amy?
I was just going to say, I don't hear that from our community. And I think you all have made some valid points to kind of leave it as is.
Okay.
Mary,
I just want to make it clear that this had nothing to do with special devices for special ed or for approved devices. It was about the approval and about, a lot of instructors having a hard time when they're teaching a class and the kids are sitting there on their phones and they, and they're, using their personal devices and instead of having them to individually try to change habits and culture, to kind of reemphasize the fact that, that is not allowed, period, in the classroom unless you have individual approval. But we are one of the few. I mean, most of the other schools, we just got on a curriculum meeting in Wayzata, Edina, Minnetonka, Bloomington, definitely some of the schools that I've come in contact with. Waconia, Hopkins, they have that rule. So it's up to us though, but I understand. But thank you for listening.
Yes, no problem. Okay, anything else on the second read of policies? Jeff, Terry? No? Okay. Superintendent relations, anything to report?
Not this evening.
Okay. Informational items, I'm assuming no. Public, Jonathan, is that you? Or are you trying to? Oh, no. Okay, sorry. You made a movement. I thought you were trying to. Informational items, nothing. Okay, public forum, we did not receive any letters today. So with that, I think I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. Appreciate you being flexible and being virtual.